Hey ServiceNow community, how are you? Back for another video related to UI Builder. I saw, based on my last video, several people commenting on wanting to know about like landing pages and how to configure those. And it got me thinking that I think before you start diving into some of the power of landing page and all that stuff, I thought a really good foundational thing about UI Builder is configuring layouts, because when you have landing pages that are typically like dashboards and things that display kind of at a glance data and lists and things like that, you want to have compelling layouts that lay out those charts and those analytics components and various other controls in a nice sensible way. And UIB has a lot of powerful capabilities around layout. I think I showed a simple kind of 2-column layout that was built, out of the box layout that came with UIB. But in this video, I think what I'm going to do is take it one step further and show you configuring like a custom layout. So there's going to be some CSS involved in this, but hopefully not, super complex CSS for folks. But just to kind of give you a sense of like, all the capabilities around layout that go beyond just the simple, kind of out of the box stuff. So let's get started here. I'm going to go ahead and jump into UI Builder here. And I'm just for the sake of reinforcing this concept, I'm going to create my own app config for this. Or my own experience, I should say, now experience. I'm going to call this like, layout demo. And my app shell UI, we'll just use the blank app shell like I did in the last video. There it is. And we'll just call this layout/demo as my core URL path. Jump into the admin panel, and none of this should be that foreign to folks, but I'm just going to go ahead and create a new app config. Simply call it layout demo again. Press submit. So I got an admin panel. Go ahead and click submit. And that's done. Go back into UI Builder, hit this little refresh button, and my layout demo should show up, which it is. And we jump into UI Builder. Go ahead and create a page. Simple page here is going to be layout home, and press create. All right, cool. So just did that kind of simple app config and experience creation. And so let's jump over to Lucidchart. I drew myself a couple of layouts to demonstrate, like, here's sort of like some typical layouts that you might want in like a landing page or a dashboard page or something like that. And so we'll try to build this one first. So a layout like this isn't available out of the box. So I have to customize it in order to get, something like this. It's going to require a little bit of CSS. This is not the only way to create a layout like this. You can also do it more declaratively by like bringing containers in and nesting containers. But, for me, I want my layout to be a little more performant. So I like to kind of keep things as one-dimensional or as sort of flat as possible, so the browser doesn't have to like do a lot of, work to render these layouts. So I'm going to do this myself using grid, which we'll look at here in a second. But so yes, we'll try to assemble this layout and fill it with content and components, and kind of give you a sense of what that might look like doing that in UI Builder. So we'll keep referring back to this just in case. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started here. So I've got a blank page. And my body has already a simple layout, right? It's got just basically a one slot or one column, one row layout, if you will. So we'll start there. But in this little 3-dot menu over here, you can see that there's an option where I can actually customize what's called the layout code. And the layout code is a JSON object that represents this layout. Again, this layout's super simple, right? It's just one column and one row. And I think it's actually a flex layout out of the box. But I can edit this layout by just hitting edit layout code. And when I'm brought to this modal that's got a code editor in here that I'm gonna maximize so we can actually see what this layout comprises of. And basically what you can see here is that I've got an item in the layout, and the item is essentially a slot. It's a slot where I can put content into. And this, again, is a simple one slot layout. It's only got a main slot, and that's where I could, dump all my content and put everything in there. And then down below that is just some CSS rules and some additional styles that you can apply to, your layout here. So jumping back here, and I was right. Yeah, like the type, this happens to be a flex layout. We're gonna do ours in grid. So again, just going back here, you can see that this first thing is going to be the layout that I want to apply here. So how does grid work? Not to get too technical here, but basically what you have is a 3-row and 2-column grid layout here. So you can see I've got 3 of these slots. So you can imagine that's sort of 3 rows. And then there's, this column and then this big column, right? So 2 columns, 3 rows, and we're going to assemble this, in CSS to make this work. So let's go back here. And what that means is I've got 1, 2, 3, I've got 4 slots. 1 slot, 2 slots, 3 slots, 4 slots. So I've got 4 slots to specify in my layout code, if you will. And so each of these is going to be an item in my layout code. Right now I've only got 1 item. It's described by this object here. Again, the main slot. I'm going to go ahead and copy that object, and I'm going to put a second one, a third one, and a fourth one. Just like I said, I've got 4 slots that my new layout is going to require. And we're going to eventually get into like rows and columns and stuff like that. But just to start with, I need 4 things, right? I need 4 spaces to insert content into. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'm going to call this like L1, L2, and L3. I think that kind of sort of makes sense to me in terms of like naming these areas of my layout. And then I'll call this one over here main, because it's sort of like the big aspect, the big slot. So cool. So we've got slot 1's going to be called main. That's the big one that we just saw. And I'm not going to worry about styles right now. So it inside of it'll be a flex layout. So we'll just leave that alone for now. I don't think we really need to mess with that. And we can go deeper and deeper into CSS, but that's beyond the scope of this video. But I just want to show that we're going to name that big one main, and it's going to occupy, which we'll see in a second, but it's going to occupy a grid area also called main. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to name the slot main, and I'm going to name the grid area main, and we'll see what grid area means in a second. So, and again, L1, and we'll say that I'll just copy grid area because I'm going to retype this a lot. Its grid area will also be L1, and this is slot name L2, and its grid area, you guessed it, is going to be L2. And then finally, this slot is L3, and its grid area is also L3. So keeping it simple, right? So those are all 4 of our spaces are now defined as items in our layout code. Again, going back here, L1, L2, L3, and main. We've got them all nicely specified. So you're wondering, what does grid area mean? Those of you who are CSS grid experts know immediately what I'm doing here. Those that aren't, it's a really cool way that CSS grid allows you to kind of use more human language to identify where content gets slotted into your grid. So you're labeling basically spaces in your grid. Basically what that means is I'm saying that this slot is going to occupy a part of my grid labeled L3. That might be confusing, but I think it'll hopefully make sense as we kind of do the final part of the CSS grid configuration here. So down here in rules, so now I'm down in the rules for my entire layout, right? Like all I did up here was the specific items of inside my layout. Now I'm going to dictate the rules for the entire layout, and none of this really really truly make sense anymore because we're not really doing a flex layout anymore. So the first thing I'm going to actually go down here and say that my layout code, the type of my layout is not flex, it's actually grid. And so I'm going to change that to type grid. And then these rules kind of don't really make a ton of sense anymore. So I'm just going to kill them all. And then what I'm going to say is I'm going to dictate my grid template rows. This is all JSON, by the way, so you can see that I'm doing this all in JSON syntax. I'm going to define my grid template columns, right? And finally, I'm going to dictate my grid template areas, which is I'm going to assemble a matrix of these labels up here that will make my grid be in this shape that we see here. And you do that by saying not only we've labeled each of these spaces, right? We've labeled it L1, L2, L3, and main. Now we need to tell the grid engine like how to lay out each of those cells of the grid or spaces of the grid. So let's start by like saying, okay, what rows do I have? Well, if you remember going back here, I've got 3 rows, and they're all evenly proportioned. They're all proportioned out evenly, meaning they're all the same kind of height, each of these rows. So in order to do that, and again, this is not an exhaustive course on CSS grid, but I'm going to say you guys take up exactly one unit of available space, essentially 1 FR, 1 unit of available space each. So then that basically says you've got 3 rows here, all of the same height, essentially. Now template columns, like I said before, we've got 2 columns. We've got this narrow column on the left, and we've got this wider column on the right. So this one might take up 1 unit of available space, and this one could take up 2 units of available space. In other words, of the 3 units of available space, this one takes up 1, and this big one takes up 2 units of available space. And again, it's 2 columns. So going back here in my grid template columns, I'm going to say 1 FR and 2 FR are my 2 columns. So 3 rows, 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR, and 2 columns, 1 FR, 2 FR. And then finally, this is where the syntax gets a little crazy, but I have to define the grid area labels and how I want them to lay out in this grid. So, and I essentially do this row by row. I have to encapsulate this in quotes because this is JSON. And then since I can't put line returns into this like you would expect in a normal CSS declaration, I have to use like quotes that encapsulate each row here. So sorry for the confusion here. This is a little interesting, but I basically have to say, so I have to escape a quote here and then escape an end quote here. Now again, the entire thing is surrounded by quotes. So inside of this is my first row. So my first row is going to be L1 and then main, right? So L1 and main, going back to my grid, L1 and then main occupy the first row right here, right? And if you can guess it, L2 and main are going to occupy the second row, and then L3 and main are going to occupy the third row. So I take this escaped quote sequence, and I essentially just go ahead and do a space, and I copy, and I'll do a space, and I'll copy. And again, you can probably guess it's going to be L2 main and L3 main. So basically like row 1 is L1 main, row 2 is L2 main, and row 3 is L3 main. And that is what essentially tells CSS Grid how to assemble this type of layout. So that should be all we need, right? In terms of our custom layout code for this particular layout. So I'm going to go ahead and come out of full screen mode here, and I'm going to go ahead and click apply. And there you go. So UI Builder now renders my custom built layout. And you can see in the left panel over here, my content tree, you can see that like in the body of my page, I've got a main slot, which is the big one. I've got an L1 slot, an L2 slot, and an L3 slot. And then I can start filling it with content. So let's go ahead and do that. So in the L1 slot, I'm going to use a data visualization component. And while it's loading over here, I'm going to search for like users, and we'll say, active users, which is a cool little single score component, great for a dashboard. And maybe this is a dashboard of like all the users on the system or something like that. So we'll just go ahead and leave that alone, and we'll click apply, and I should get my single score component into that first slot, L1. Now what am I going to do in L2? Let's do another data visualization. Go ahead and add a data source. Let's stick with the user motif. And again, this is not going to be an exhaustive demonstration of how to use the data visualization. That's possibly another video we could do in the future, but just showing how, filling content in our custom layout is really what we're doing here. And we'll just say inactive users, let's say. So we got one inactive user. Cool. Let's go ahead and apply. And there's our, one inactive user. And then inside of here, let's do another data visualization, and add a data source. I don't know. Can I find something cool from CMDB? I don't know. I'm sort of winging it here. No, there's no. We'll just stick with the user motif because I know I can get single scores off of this. And admin users added 1. Cool. So we've got those, right? Now, if you remember in our layout, one thing I want to call out is, so I'm going to go back to body, which is where I'm going to be able to go. And you'll notice that, it's basically saying, hey, you're using this, but it's starred, meaning that it was customized, right? So I can go back into edit layout code, and I get my awesome layout. So I'll maximize this. So I wanted to demonstrate that inside each of these items, or these slots that I, the 4 slots that I created in my layout, I said that inside of those slots, they lay out using a flex layout standard. So even though the body of my layout is determined by a grid, each individual cell inside of the grid lays out its content with flex, and it's column. So in other words, like, it's going to be stacked. Things are going to be stacked vertically by default in each of these. They're all doing display flex, flex direction column. So inside, it's all going to be stacked, which is perfect for what I want to do here. So let's get out of this again. I'll go ahead and cancel, because above this single score component, for instance, I'm going to hit add above. You can see the add button appears above, right? Because I'm flex column, meaning it's content stacks vertically. I'm going to use the I'm going to use the stylized text component, and I'm just going to go ahead and put something like active users, and I'll make it an H3. Let's make it an H2 or H4. Sorry. So that's a nice little label there. You can even if you want to edit the text and say the color is, more gray, you can do that and kind of gray it out to give it a little more feel. I'll do the same thing here. I think this one was inactive users. We'll use stylized text again. We'll make it an H4, and we'll say inactive users, CSS. We can just say color gray. Awesome. And finally, I think this was admin users. So we'll go ahead and again hit the plus icon above. We'll hit the stylized text component, make it an H4, call it admin users, and we'll just say color gray again, just to be a little fun. Cool. And so boom, we got something kind of cool. The other thing you can do, if your content, sometimes your content doesn't take up all the height of the available space that's available in the cell. You can style the component itself, right? So I've got this data visualization component sitting here. I can force it to take a height of 100%, if I want to do that, right? So I'll just copy that out. Do the same thing for this, the styles on this component, and do the same thing for the styles on this component. So I've just essentially forced these things to take up 100% of the available height. Or, you know, you can kind of mess with that, but just to give you a sense of that. And then finally, in our main content area, I kind of like to, I don't know, just as a, you know, maybe this is like a simple list, and maybe the simple list is users, since we're going with the user motif. Can I search for sys user maybe? Let's try that. Sys user, cool. And so there's sys user, so this should re-render with users. There's some users. We want more than 5 rows. Let's just say we'll take 20 rows, so it takes up a ton of space. That's great. You know, whatever there. Oh yeah, we can say all users is the title of our list. And bam, we've kind of made a cool little simple page with an exciting layout that's a little bit, you know, better than, you know, sort of like what a standard layout would be if we open this up in the runtime. Again, I used a blank app shell. You could do this in Workspace or, you know, some other app shell, you know, making this a dashboard page or something like that in the Workspace. But I just used blank app shell, if you remember, when I created this page. So so there's going to be no, you know, header, footer, like navigation. It's just going to be a blank page. Let this load, and there you go. There is our page. So I hope you found this interesting. Maybe this isn't interesting, but I feel like there's, you know, making layouts in UIB is pretty powerful, and it's kind of cool how you can like write the code and then it like kind of reads the code for you and like makes everything very approachable and easy to kind of manipulate and configure once the layout code has been created. There's a lot of documentation on the internet about how CSS grid works, which I think you might be able to intuit and apply into the layout code here in UI Builder. But yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll continue to think about other interesting videos to do. But yeah, thanks for your time and attention, and we will speak to you soon. Take care.